wonderful. I was about to go there. I was about to say, excellent, excellent. You're getting a credit today.
I'm getting what?
You're getting a credit today for that.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's just so. The proto-mental system in groups is what later in Bion's work or in Bion's experience, when he went into a psychoanalytic period, became the unconscious. Exactly so. Except for one thing, right? Because the unconscious is still a vast territory. That is, Bion called the proto-mental system proto-mental because he wanted to point out that the basic assumptions are not mental. By not mental, but proto-mental, he meant to say that this is prior to the acquisition of the ability to think. In that sense, it's proto-mental and not mental, because he reserved the word mental for thinking. Mental referred to the thinking apparatus. And the basic assumptions just happen. Remember that we spoke of the concept of valencies last time, like in chemistry. Well, valencies are not something that you think of. You don't decide to have a valency. You just have a valency. Right? It's more, well, it's proto-mental. Right?
How is that different than preconception?
I thought too.
Well, we are going to get there. No, preconception is an entirely different matter. Preconception is the matrix of the mind, that allows you to be sensitive to an object, so as to recognize it when it hits you or when you meet it. For instance, the baby has a preconception of the breast.
Right.
The preconception of the breast means that the baby is sensitive, unless it is an autistic baby, right? That the baby is sensitive before it met the breast to the presence of the breast. And no sooner the mother approaches the nipple to the baby, or the nipple touches the cheek, the baby turns around, opens the mouth, and knows absolutely well what it has to do with the breast. You don't need to teach the baby that. Why does he? Because he's sensitive to the breast, just like our retinae are sensitive to the light, not to all the light, to some spectrum of light. For instance, our retinae are not sensitive to ultraviolet or to infrared. We don't see the infrared. Our skin is sensitive to the infrared. You feel the heat. Your eye, your retinae are not able to see the infrared. But they're sensitive to a wide range of light that you can see. That's the preconception. The proto-mental doesn't give you the ability to think. Actually, it's all the opposite. It gives you the ability to just react without thinking. It may be very useful, let's say, as Bion had it, in times of war, right? The fight-flight reaction may save your life, but you don't think about it. You have an adrenaline discharge and you run away or you fight. It's not something that you have learned.
You know, I think the differentiation of preconception from the proto-mental system, it's dicey, you know.
Yes.
The preconception has to do with the sensitivity to an object, whereas the proto-mental system it's the source of basic assumptions, which apparently are some unconscious readiness to frame a group experience in a particular way. But I mean, it seems like there's so much overlap. You know, we're talking about instinct in terms of preconception, and the proto-mental system. Well, I don't know how important it is, actually.
Now, the difference is that the preconception develops into conceptions, thoughts, and objects. It's the matrix in order to get to know and to get to symbolize. The basic assumptions are the matrix to non-thinking. It doesn't develop.
Okay.
But you can step back and think about it once it's happened and see that there has been a basic assumption.
Sure, but you think about it not under the basic assumption, but under the work group part of your mind, to set yourself to work and think. This doesn't come from the proto-mental system. It comes from the development of the ability to think. And the ability of the development to think does not come from the basic assumptions. The basic assumptions, I would say, are the animal
Yes.
part of ourselves, the non-thinking part.
The group animal part of
The
ourselves.
group animal part of ourselves, correct. Yes.
The social readiness to organize in particular ways, unconsciously speaking.
Exactly. Right? Now let us leave that aside, because all I wanted to go over quickly, and we have lots of other things to discuss today, is what the proto-mental system is. And that is, it's that, what's that?
Oh, just a lot more than I bargained for.
Oh, probably. The proto-mental system then is just that part of, or that place where the basic assumptions go when they are not active, or those basic assumptions that are not active, right? That is, in the fight-flight basic assumption, there are still the other two that are not active, and where they reside is in the proto-mental system, meaning that they can emerge at any given time, right? That said, I want to quickly go over what seems in Bion's work be the forerunner of his idea of countertransference. And you remember that Blandoni spoke about that. Blandoni, in what you read for last time, said that Bion did not believe in the usefulness of countertransference, which is true. Bion here and there said, following Freud's definition, he said countertransference is by definition unconscious, and therefore there is nothing that we can do about it. Right? Meaning it is there, but if it is unconscious by definition, well, what can you do? You don't know about it. So if you don't know, you don't know. There's nothing that you can do. That was was his definition initially following Freud. But he changed his mind later. And then, in groups, and he changed his mind because of his experiences in groups, he writes this, and Blandoni paraphrases him, but I thought I could read it just from Bion's text in itself. This is group dynamics. He says, it is my belief that these reactions, and he means the emotional reactions of the group therapist, it is my belief that these reactions are dependent on the fact that the analyst in the group, or rather the group analyst, is at the receiving end of what Melanie Klein has called projective identification from the group members. And that this mechanism plays a very important role in groups. Now, the experience of countertransference appears to me to have quite a distinct quality that should enable the analyst to differentiate the occasion when he is the object of a projective identification from the occasion when he is not. That is, that countertransference now is no longer for Bion by definition unconscious, though if you're not aware of it, right, if you don't know that it exists, or if it exists but you're not observing it in yourself, it will be unconscious. But if you know that it exists, you will try to look for it, because now you know that this is something that you want to go for when you are the group therapist or the group analyst. So you will want to differentiate when your emotional reaction in the group is a reaction to a projection you were receiving from the group. Let's say the group idealized you and decided to let you do the thinking for everybody else. And at a certain moment you realize that you have been put into that place and that you are actually playing that role. Then you would have to know that that is your reaction to a group phenomenon, to a projection, projective identification that came from the group. It could also not be that way. Suppose that you are very narcissistic and you're very competitive and you have decided that you won't let anybody talk, you will talk all alone all the time, and the group is just being silent and patient with you, waiting for the time to be over. Well, you have to make that distinction to say, is this coming from me? Right? Is this my personal equation? Or have I been invited into that place, and unbeknownst to me, until I realized it, I've occupied that place and I've played that role. And he further says, the analyst feels he is being manipulated so as to be playing a part, no matter how difficult to recognize, in somebody else's fantasy, or he would do if it were not for what in recollection I can only call a temporary loss of insight, a sense of experiencing strong feelings, and at the same time a belief that their existence is quite adequately justified by the objective situation without recourse to recondite explanation of their causation. Yes? No?
I didn't catch that.
Would you read the last sentence?
Yeah.
Sure.
That's pretty dense.
It is. The analyst feels he is being manipulated so as to be playing a part, no matter how difficult to recognize, in somebody else's fantasy. Somebody else's fantasy means in the fantasy of members of the group. He's talking of groups here, right? In somebody else's fantasy. Or he would do if it were not for what in recollection I can only call a temporary loss of insight. What he would do means
He wouldn't play the role of the fantasy.
well, he would be manipulated if he were not aware that he's being manipulated, right? He would be manipulated and would not be aware of being manipulated because of a temporary loss of insight. That is, because of the analyst's unawareness temporarily of what is going on between him and the group members. And if he's not aware, he will find himself being invited to play a role, and playing a role that satisfies the unspoken projection or expectations or desires of the group members towards him. That is then Bion's definition of countertransference. Nowadays we talk about that as enactment. We say the analyst enacts a role. The analyst is often invited to enact or to play a role in the patient's fantasy. And Bion brought that from groups. He says, well, I saw that happening in groups. Right? The analyst is invited to perform a role unbeknownst to him. He's being manipulated, meaning he's being pushed to, invited to. But he didn't notice it until he does.
Yeah, until they do.
Is it clear now?
Go ahead, Chris.
The part that's unclear for me is the fantasy of the group or the collective that he's talking about. Is that just if one member of the group has the fantasy of the leader being such and such, then it's unconsciously like swallowed up by the whole group? Or does the whole group unconsciously take in the fantasies of one of the members and join together.
Yes, good question. Did you hear Julie?
Somewhat. Yeah, something about, well, I can't repeat it, but I think I heard.
Well, Chris is asking if the projective identification that the analyst is being manipulated